There comes a point in a woman's life when sex stops being just about pleasure, connection, or love. It becomes something else. Something raw. Something that feels like survival. You can see it in her eyes. That quiet panic beneath the surface. The way she lingers longer in the mirror than she used to, searching for herself in the reflection of time. She's not just looking at her body. She's looking for proof that she's still seen. That she still exists in the gaze of another. Because after 40, the world starts whispering something cruel to women. It tells them, you are fading. The same society that once worshipped their beauty now scrolls past it. The compliments slow down. The looks disappear. And what used to come effortlessly, attention, desire, validation, now feels like something she has to fight for. But here's the uncomfortable truth. When a woman hits that stage, sex stops being about lust. It becomes about existence. It's her last bridge to feeling alive in a world that no longer looks her way. Most people don't understand that. They think she's chasing pleasure, or that she's lost her morals, or that she's just going through something. But they don't see what's underneath. The quiet grief of invisibility. The subtle death that comes when she no longer feels wanted. You see, men experience aging differently. When men age, power often replaces beauty. Their wrinkles can look like wisdom. Their gray hair becomes gravitas. They are allowed to remain desirable, even admired, as they grow older. But for women, the rules are crueler. Their currency is beauty. Their social value is youth. And when that fades, many feel like their identity fades with it. So when she seeks sex after 40, it's not always about the act itself. It's about the confirmation that she's still here, that she can still move someone. That her body can still create emotion in another human being. Because deep down, she's terrified of becoming emotionally extinct. We live in a culture that glorifies youth as the only form of feminine power. So what happens when that youth slips away? What happens when she realizes that no one is looking anymore, that she's become background noise in a world she used to command? That's when sex transforms. It stops being a desire. It becomes a lifeline. A way to feel something, anything, that reminds her of who she was, or who she still hopes to be. And this is where the truth turns darker. Because for many women, the need for intimacy becomes tied to their psychological survival. The body becomes a battlefield, a desperate attempt to reclaim the emotional territory lost to time. She tells herself it's just attraction, just chemistry, just fun. But beneath it all, there's something deeper. A hunger that has nothing to do with physical need. It's the hunger to matter again. Sex becomes the last mirror that still reflects her. And that's why it's so hard to let go. When you've spent a lifetime being desired, being admired, being the center of someone's attention, and suddenly that stops, the silence is deafening. You begin to question everything. Who am I if no one wants me? Am I still beautiful, or just remembered as beautiful? Does anyone still look at me and feel something? This is the hidden pain that lives behind the confident smiles and social media filters. This is what people don't see, that for many women, the loss of desire is not just about sex. It's about identity, relevance, and worth. And when the world stops seeing her, she goes searching for someone who will. Even if it's temporary. Even if it's dangerous. Even if it means crossing lines she never thought she would. Because for her, at that age, sex is no longer about the body. It's about memory. It's about proving to herself that she still exists in someone else's world. And that, right there, is the forbidden truth. That beyond 40, sex becomes the emotional oxygen that keeps her soul breathing, in a society that's slowly suffocating her without even noticing. There's a certain kind of silence that falls over a woman's life after 40. It's not loud, not dramatic, it's subtle. It's the silence of phones that stop buzzing, the slow fade of compliments, the way men's eyes slide past her in a room where they used to linger. And that silence, at first, feels peaceful. Until she realizes it's not peace at all. It's erasure. Let me tell you about Laura. She was 43 when she confessed something that shattered her own illusion of self-control. Married for 15 years, mother of 2, she loved her husband, but not in the way she used to. The spark was gone, buried under years of routine and responsibility. One night, during a work trip, a man half her age flirted with her. It was harmless at first, a smile, a compliment, a conversation that lasted too long. But in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, alive. She told me later, "It wasn't about him. It was about me." I wanted to remember what it felt like to be wanted, not needed, not depended on, but wanted. That's the difference most people don't understand. Men often confuse a woman's craving for intimacy with lust. But after 40, it's rarely about sex for the sake of sex. It's about meaning. About being seen again, as a woman, not a role. Laura didn't fall in love with the young man. She fell in love with the way he looked at her, like she was still capable of causing desire. That look was a drug. And like any drug, it was never about the high itself, it was about escaping the numbness that had settled into her life. There's another story. Evelyn, age 47. She'd been divorced for 3 years. A kind woman, introverted, faithful for most of her life. After her marriage ended, she tried to rebuild. She took care of her health, started reading again, went to therapy. But no matter how much progress she made, there was a hollow place that wouldn't fill. One night she said, "I miss being touched like I mattered." Not touched with pity, not out of obligation, but with urgency, with the kind of reverence that says, "You still make me feel something." For Evelyn, sex wasn't about pleasure. It was a way of touching her own fading reflection, reminding herself that the woman inside her hadn't died, she'd just been forgotten. Every time someone desired her, even briefly, she felt the pulse of her younger self again, that fire she thought time had extinguished. But this is the paradox. The more she used sex to feel alive, the emptier she felt afterward. Because no amount of desire from another person can fill the silence that comes when you stop desiring yourself. That's the cruel trap. When a woman loses her reflection in the eyes of others, she starts chasing it in the wrong places, hoping each encounter will restore what time took away. But it never does. It only reminds her how temporary it all is. And then there's Marianne, 50, married for 22 years. Her husband loves her, in the quiet, consistent way that men often love when the passion cools. But to her, that quiet felt like invisibility. She once said, "He looks at me like I'm part of the furniture of his life, comfortable, reliable, but invisible." So she began posting more online, subtle photos, not overtly sexual, but carefully chosen. The likes rolled in. The messages followed. She told herself it was harmless validation, but deep down she knew she was feeding something darker, a starvation that had nothing to do with attention, and everything to do with self-worth. You see, for women after 40, sex becomes intertwined with meaning in a way that few will admit. Because when youth fades, they no longer use beauty as currency, they use intimacy as proof of existence. And it's not just about the physical act. It's about the emotional choreography beneath it, the anticipation, the look, the touch, the confirmation that she can still move someone's soul. When Marianne finally had an affair, something she swore she'd never do, she described it not as betrayal, but resurrection. "It felt like breathing after holding my breath for years," she said. But when it ended, she felt even emptier than before. Because what she'd really been chasing wasn't the man. It was her reflection in his eyes. This is the unspoken reality that so few understand. After 40, sex for many women becomes a way to fight against psychological extinction. It's not about lust, not about conquest, it's about survival. And it's not just individual psychology, it's cultural. Society rewards women for being youthful and punishes them for aging. The same magazines that once told them how to attract attention now sell them anti-aging creams and silence. When a woman realizes she's no longer desired by the collective gaze, she internalizes it as a kind of emotional death. That's why the desire for sex transforms into something primal, not just for pleasure, but for resurrection. To be desired is to be seen. To be seen is to be alive. But the deeper tragedy is this. Every time she seeks that validation externally, she drifts further from the one thing she truly needs, the internal peace of being enough without it. There's a particular kind of loneliness that seeps into the bones after 40. It's not the loneliness of being alone, it's the loneliness of being unseen. You can be surrounded by people, loved by your children, cared for by your husband, respected by your colleagues, and still feel like you've vanished. Because the world doesn't see women the same way once they've aged past their youth. It's as if they've crossed an invisible line, from being the center of attention to being quietly tolerated. Society still praises them for their strength, their wisdom, their graceful aging. But beneath those compliments lies a colder message: your value has shifted. And that's where the emotional storm begins. For a woman, sex after 40 becomes more than a need, it becomes a rebellion against fading into the background. It's a fight against the slow erosion of relevance. It's an act of defiance against time itself. The tragedy is that this hunger doesn't come from arrogance, it comes from pain. From the aching realization that the mirror no longer reflects the woman she once was, but someone the world has already started to overlook. When she's desired, for even a moment, she feels her pulse again. The lights come back on. The music starts playing again in a room that had gone silent for years. It's not about the sex, it's about aliveness. It's about remembering the rhythm of being wanted. But here's where it turns darker, because this kind of emotional hunger is bottomless. You can feed it, but it never feels full. Each moment of intimacy becomes both medicine and poison. It soothes her, then reminds her of what she's lost. It revives her for a night, but empties her when the morning comes. It's like chasing a ghost, the ghost of who she used to be. The act becomes ritual. The way she dresses, the way she speaks, the way she flirts, it all carries the quiet urgency of someone trying to reclaim something stolen. But the harder she tries, the faster it slips away. Because time is merciless. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't return what it's taken. So she bargains in other ways. She redefines her value, telling herself she's more than her body, more than her beauty. And she is. But even as she says it, there's a part of her that still aches to be wanted, not just respected. To be desired, not just admired. To be touched with intention, not politeness. She wants to feel that spark again, the one that once made her body respond before her mind could. The one that made her feel powerful, alive, irreplaceable. But as years go by, that spark becomes harder to find, and when she does find it, it feels more sacred, and more dangerous. Because every time she feels desired now, she also feels the countdown. She knows it won't last forever. She knows that moment, that electricity, is fleeting. And so she clings to it harder, holds it longer, even if it means giving more of herself away. It's not addiction in the traditional sense, it's emotional survival. When your worth has been tied to your desirability your entire life, the loss of that desirability feels like the loss of self. So sex becomes the ritual of resurrection, a way to briefly breathe life back into a dying sense of identity. But here's the cruel part: the more she seeks it externally, the more she confirms the very fear she's trying to escape, that her value exists only when someone else validates it. And when the man leaves, or when the excitement fades, she's left alone again, staring into that mirror, wondering if she ever truly existed outside of someone's desire. Some women grow bitter in this stage. Some grow wild. Others go silent, turning their longing inward, trying to make peace with the void. But they all feel it. That ache. That subtle desperation that whispers late at night, "I just want to feel alive again." And the men in their lives rarely understand. They think she's distant, moody, ungrateful. They don't realize she's fighting a quiet war within herself. She's not trying to betray him. She's trying to find herself before she disappears completely. Because what she's really mourning isn't just lost youth, it's lost power. The power that came from being seen, from knowing she could awaken something in another person just by existing. That power was her reflection, her reassurance, her mirror. Now, without it, she has to rebuild her identity from within, something few women were ever taught to do. Society taught her how to be beautiful. It taught her how to be desired. but it never taught her how to be invisible and still feel whole. So she reaches for what she knows: touch, intimacy, sex. Because those are the languages she once mastered, the languages that spoke to her worth. And in that fleeting moment when someone looks at her with desire again, not pity, not politeness, but real, raw hunger, something inside her exhales. It says, "I still matter." That's why it's not about promiscuity or vanity. It's about validation at the deepest, most primal level. It's about the need to be emotionally felt in a world that has gone emotionally numb. And that's why sex after 40 isn't about pleasure anymore, it's about survival. Because when the world stops seeing you, being desired becomes a way to keep existing. There's a moment, quiet and unglamorous, when every woman realizes time has crossed her. It doesn't happen in one dramatic instant. No calendar marks it, no alarm announces it. It happens slowly, silently, like dusk folding over daylight. One day she looks in the mirror and feels the echo of her younger self staring back, familiar but distant, like someone she used to know. That's when the questions begin. Who am I, if I'm no longer the one who turns heads? Who am I, if the world stops responding to my presence? Who am I, when my beauty no longer speaks louder than my silence? These are not vain questions. They are existential ones. Because for women, the body is not just flesh, it's language. It's how they've been seen, understood, valued. When that language begins to fade, they are forced to learn a new one, a quieter one, built not on attention, but awareness. But here's the tragedy and the truth. Society never prepared women for that silence. It taught them how to bloom, not how to fade. It worshipped their youth, but abandoned them in their maturity. And so, when they reach that age, 40, 45, 50, and the world starts dimming the light around them, they begin to use what's left of that light like oxygen. That's why sex becomes emotional survival. Not because they're shallow or desperate, but because it's one of the last places they can feel seen without explanation. To be touched with intention is to be reminded that the soul still radiates beneath the skin. That time can take youth, but not essence. That somewhere, beyond wrinkles and years, something eternal still burns. But the problem is, most women don't realize they've been taught to chase their reflection through the eyes of others. They don't know how to see themselves without needing to be seen. So they oscillate between two worlds. The world of youth, where they were adored, and the world of age, where they must learn to adore themselves. It's a painful transition, the shedding of external validation. It feels like loss, but it's actually transformation. Because if she survives it, if she learns to find meaning in her own gaze, she becomes something untouchable. There's a quiet power in the woman who no longer depends on being desired to feel real. Her beauty becomes something you sense rather than see. Her presence becomes magnetic, not because she's trying to attract, but because she radiates peace, the kind that only comes when you faced the mirror and accepted the reflection. Sex, for her, transforms again. It stops being survival. It becomes communion, not with someone else, but with life itself. Because when she no longer needs to be chosen, she can finally choose. When she no longer needs to be desired, she can finally desire freely, without fear, without agenda, without the shadow of aging hanging over her. That's when sex stops being a desperate grasp for relevance, and becomes an expression of selfhood. She's no longer trying to prove she's alive, she knows she is. But to reach that point, she has to walk through fire. She has to mourn the girl she once was. She has to confront the unbearable truth that beauty is temporary, and that the world is often too shallow to see beyond it. And still, she must love herself enough to exist anyway. There's a kind of holiness in that acceptance. Because when she no longer fears invisibility, she becomes unshakably visible, not to the crowd, but to herself. Sex, then, is no longer a mirror of survival, but a canvas of meaning. It's not about proving her worth, but celebrating it. It's not about chasing youth, but embodying timelessness. And that is the paradox. The moment she no longer needs to be wanted, she becomes truly irresistible. Not in a sexual way, but in a spiritual one. Because the energy that once went into being seen turns inward, and begins to glow. She doesn't need validation anymore. She's become her own witness. And when that happens, when a woman crosses that invisible threshold, the world can no longer take anything from her. That's the real freedom. That's the peace that comes after the storm, when she realizes that the love she was searching for through the eyes of others was simply her own reflection waiting to be seen. So yes, for many women, sex after 40 begins as survival. But if she's brave enough to face the silence, to sit in the ache without escaping it, it can become something higher. It can become a bridge between who she was and who she's becoming. It can become the language of a soul that has finally learned to love itself beyond being loved. And that, perhaps, is the ultimate evolution of desire. To reach a place where touch is no longer proof of existence, but an offering of it. Because in the end, every woman will face the same question. When the world stops seeing you, will you still see yourself? The ones who answer yes, they don't just survive, they transcend.